Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you this morning on Channel 9, on WJOP LP Newburyport at FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm just delighted to welcome today's guest. First up today will be Michelle Duster, who's here to talk with us about her great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. And in the second part of the show, Suzanne Geiger, Executive Director of the Jean Geiger Crisis Center, will be here to talk about their upcoming 10th annual Heart Ribbon event. But first, let me introduce you to Michelle Duster. She's a writer, a speaker, a professor, and a champion of racial and gender equality. She's written, edited, or contributed to 16 books, 2 that feature the woman she's here to talk with us about today, Ida B. Wells. She's written Ida B. Wells, Voice of Truth, and also Ida B. the Queen, The Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells is, as I mentioned, Michelle Duster's great-grandmother. Her advocacy, Michelle's advocacy, has led to street names, monuments, historical markers, and other public history projects that highlight women and African Americans, including Ida B. Wells. Michelle, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mary.
It's totally my pleasure. You know, Michelle, I have to start by confessing that I knew of Ida B. Wells. I knew that she was a trailblazing civil rights journalist, but I didn't know that much about the extent and range and the depth of her specific achievements until my curiosity about her got sparked early this year by a news article I saw in the Washington Post about Ida B. Wells being transformed into a Barbie doll by Mattel. And she's now part of what they call their Inspiring Women series, joining other luminaries such as Florence Nightingale, Billie Jean King, Maya Angelou, Frida Kahlo, Eleanor Roosevelt, many others. So Michelle, first, please tell us how you felt about your great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, becoming a Barbie, and why such representation matters.
All right, well, first I'll just explain that I'm related to Ida B. Wells through my father. She was my father's grandmother. And I always knew that she was my ancestor, the same way that I knew all of my other family members. And so, you know, Ida was a trailblazing journalist who used journalism as a form of social activism to expose the realities that were associated with lynching. And she became a civil rights activist, and she was involved in the suffrage movement. She was one of the founders of the NAACP and one of the founders of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. So she was very active during her 68-year life. Mm-hmm. And so my family, I'm the third generation of my family who has worked to help make sure that this country remembers the contributions that my great-grandmother gave to this country. As you mentioned, I have been very active. I've written 2 books, edited 2 books about my great-grandmother, been involved in public history projects, markers, murals, a major monument here in Chicago. And so when Mattel contacted me about creating a doll around her, I was a little bit surprised and very much honored that they felt that she could, be part of this Inspiring Women series. I think it's important for there to be representation for young children and for them to be introduced not only to dolls that look like them, but real people. And so they can play with the doll, but also learn history and be inspired by people who worked so hard for them to have the rights that we all do. And so my hope with this doll is that, young girls and adults, young at heart, will learn that the reason we have a right to vote, women have a right to vote, is because my great-grandmother was involved in the suffrage movement. And there are many other things that some people take for granted today that were a struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think what you're saying, Michelle, about the importance of the knowledge of history and representation has been underlined if anybody's been watching the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings. and following the news about her. There are so many stories about what this means to young Black girls who can now see themselves and will be able to see themselves in a Supreme Court justice. And so I think, it's absolutely critical and important. The younger people learn our history, and the younger they can have access to inspiring figures, and to know that change can happen, and I can become a change maker myself, like Ida B. Wells or others of the Inspiring Women series. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Well, as I've shared with you in preparation for this interview, I'm just in awe of Ida B. Wells, and I know many people are, and deservedly so. To me, she appeared to have an extraordinary amount of courage and also a clarity about her convictions, which seemed to drive her absolute fearlessness and determination. She's known for many, many achievements, but prominent among them is her journalism exposing the truth about lynching and mob violence in the South, for which she received a posthumous Pulitzer Prize in 2020. I was hoping that you could talk to us about how this work became her priority, and the strategies that she used to bring awareness and truth to the realities of racial terrorism and lynching in the South in order to leverage change.
Right. So my great grandmother was born in 1862. She was enslaved upon birth in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And fortunately for her, the Civil War turned out the way it did in 1865. She was freed. And so she came of age during Reconstruction, which was a period of progress for short 12 years of our country's history, from 1865 to 1877. And so she grew up with having opportunities that were very new for most African Americans, especially those who had been enslaved. And so that's significant because it gave her a sense of hope. It gave her a sense of possibility, because her father was able to vote as a result of the 15th Amendment in 1870. And so she grew up in an environment and a time when there was a lot of progress. And then she also lived through post-Reconstruction, where there was a huge backlash against this progress. And so she to have rights and then have them taken away, I think is something that people really need to understand, that could motivate somebody. And so she experienced indignities when it came to public transportation being resegregated after it had been desegregated. And then she also experienced backlash against her. Three of her friends were murdered because they were successful grocery store owners. And that's really what it came down to. Their store rivaled a white-owned store, and long story short, they were murdered by lynching. And so this is the environment that my great grandmother was living in, and the narrative at that time to excuse these type of violence, this extrajudicial mob violence, was that Black men were violating white women, and she knew they were not guilty of that crime, and so it set her life on a whole different path, because she investigated other lynchings to see how many other innocent people were being killed, and she put two and two together and recognized that lynching was being used as a form of domestic terrorism to keep Black people in a certain racial hierarchy, which would be at the bottom of our society. And so she used her voice as a journalist to chronicle the realities of what was actually happening with these lynchings. And she investigated the excuses that were used to lynch people. She wrote down names, times and locations and the excuses. And so what she was doing was called data journalism today, when some people call it sociology, where she was, she was creating basically a case for the public opinion to recognize what was actually happening. And she felt that there was no way that Black people could get justice through the courts because she had already experienced injustice through the court system when she had sued a railroad and initially won because she was sued on the basis of separate and unequal, because she was thrown off a train when she refused to leave the ladies' car to go to a colored car. So she recognized that there was no way to get justice through the legal system. So she decided to have a court of public opinion. And that's what I think her strategy was to create a case for the public in order to understand what was going on so that there would be pressure from the public to stop this extrajudicial murder and to encourage people to have economic pressure against these systems that were so oppressive and terrorizing the Black community.
And she also, I learned from your book, she also took the case to Europe. She went, I believe, to Britain. And what kind of reception did she find when she went to the UK? And what made that a strategy that she thought would be effective?
Well, first, I'll just help people understand how she got to Europe. I mean, she was based in Memphis, and that's where her friends were killed. That's where Ida co-owned a newspaper called the Memphis Free Speech, which actually the Barbie has a copy of the Memphis.
Oh, excellent.
And so my great grandmother started writing about what happened with her friends, and she encouraged people to boycott the streetcars, to boycott white-owned businesses, and for those who could afford to just leave Memphis, because she strongly felt there was no way you could ever get justice in this situation where the people who are committing the crimes are the legal system. They're the judge, they're the sheriff, they're the attorneys. And so she kept writing so much that her life was threatened, and she eventually published a piece that touched such a nerve that her printing press was destroyed, and her life. I mean, she really was like she couldn't return to Memphis, and so she was in New York for about a year. She started writing in New York, in the New York Age, about what was happening regarding lynching to help the northern part of the country understand what was going on. And she started speaking. And one of the women who heard her speak was from England. And so that's how she ended up being invited to England to talk to the British about what was happening in the United States, because they couldn't even believe what they were hearing. So they wanted to hear it from somebody who was like the firsthand source. And so in 1893, and then again in 1894, she went to England and gave a ton of public speeches. The second book that I edited, called Ida from Abroad, is a collection of the articles that she wrote during that speaking tour. And so according to her, I mean, these speeches were huge. There were like 1,000 and 2,000 people in the audience.
Wow.
And she was speaking to people who were about human rights. There was an organization called the Society for the Brotherhood of Man. And that's the woman who invited her to speak. To come to England was a member of that organization. And so there was like a human rights group, if you want to call it that, in England. And so there was a tie between England and the United States, because England was one of the largest consumers of American cotton. And so my great grandmother was encouraging people to boycott American cotton, because she felt that, you have to hit people where it matters, which is economic. So she was very well received, by the people who attended. I'm sure there were people who really had a problem with her, which is impossible to avoid. But she definitely had a large audience.
Well, she took the court of opinion abroad to, as you were just pointing out, to people who had dollars to spend on American cotton. And that meant that there was some leverage there. So it strikes me as a brilliant strategy, just brilliant. And it makes me wish that I could have heard her speak. Anyway, thank you for that, Michelle. In addition to her work, her data journalism or sociology about lynching, she was also a very strong advocate for women's rights, and she worked to advance the suffrage movement. I was hoping that you could tell us some about the work that she did for that cause, and also how she encountered but found workarounds for the hypocrisy and the racism that she found among white women in that movement.
Right. Well, so we have to remember that, I mean, my great grandmother was born in 1862, when women had very few rights. And at the time she was born, there were millions, 4 million Black people who were enslaved. And so she, really had no rights, upon birth. And so there was a lot to fight for.
Yeah.
And she had seeing her father have the opportunity to vote and get involved in the political system. I mean, he was, from what I understand through my research, he was very politically engaged and enthusiastic about, taking advantage of his newfound right to vote. But then she also witnessed the dismantling of that right. So she knew that having the right to vote, having some way to have input into our country as far as from a political standpoint was very important. And so she was interested. I mean, before women had the right to vote in this country, there was a club women's movement that was very strong, which was sort of a collective way that women would advocate for issues that were important to them. The club women tended to be segregated. There were few exceptions, but there were white women's clubs, and then Black women formed their own clubs. And so that was one of the things that my great-grandmother got involved in early on, right after she had come back from England, because the club movement in England preceded the one in the United States to some extent. And so she was really intrigued by this sort of collective power that women could have together to put pressure on men to vote the right way, and to advocate for themselves in a lot of situations. So she was involved in that. And then, through the club movement, they collectively, were pushing to have political inclusion when it came to the right to vote. So that became one of the many issues that they were fighting for. And so through the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, that was one of the issues among many. But then my great-grandmother in Chicago was involved in several suffrage organizations that were integrated. But then on top of that, she decided to create her own all-Black suffrage organization called the Alpha Suffrage Club. And shortly after she created that in 1913, there was a major march in Washington, D.C., a suffrage march that was organized by Alice Paul and several other people. And this was a national march for women's suffrage. Yeah. But then when they got there, the organizers asked the Black women to march in the back of the parade. And so my great-grandmother was 51 years old at this point. Mm-hmm. And Alice Paul was in her 20s. And so, I do believe that there's some kind of a whole lot of dynamics going on there. But I, as somebody who's in my 50s, having somebody in their 20s tell me to behave myself would be like, no, I don't think so. Yeah. So I think there was an age kind of dynamic. That's just my assumption. Yeah. But in addition, obviously, the racial aspect as well. And so my great-grandmother decided to defy that request, and she inserted herself into the Illinois delegation as the parade progressed. Mm-hmm. And so she walked alongside the parade and then kind of jumped out of the crowd and inserted herself into the Illinois delegation, which is the delegation she had traveled to Washington, D.C. with.
Uh-huh.
And she had been working with these women in Illinois the whole time. So it was not like she didn't know these people.
Yeah. Yeah. So she found a way to circumvent the effort at segregating the Black women and having them walk in that. And good for her. And I totally get the unacceptability both of the racial dimension and also the age element, because I'm well past my 50s. And if somebody in her 20s were to sort of make that suggestion, I'm sure that it wouldn't land well with me. But again, the theme that comes through as we talk about your great grandmother is that she was an extraordinary leader. If an issue arose, she took action. She wasn't going to sit back or be passive. She was going to lead and form an organization, and find a way and become an advocate. And that leads us to the next question I really wanted to ask you about, Michelle, because I'm always interested in the arc of somebody's life story, how people become capable of the greatness that manifests throughout their adulthood. And as you've talked about, Ida B. Wells was born a slave in 1862, just before the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Her parents died of yellow fever. She encountered threats. She lost her newspaper to terrorism. Tomorrow, March 25th, will be the anniversary of her death in 1931. She was unstoppable, but she encountered so much loss and so many threats in her life. Of her, you have said in, I forget which book, that she had a seismic effect on so many people. And I think she continues to have a seismic effect on many people today, or the legacy of her work certainly does. So Michelle, how do you understand from whom or from what aspects of her experience, how did she derive the extraordinary bravery, the profound level of conviction and determination, and also her love for people and for justice and for human rights?
I can only guess where somebody gets their character from. I'm sure psychologists, that's their job, is to try to figure out where people come, where they get their attributes from. So I can only guess that it was from her parents. I give my great-great-grandparents a lot of credit, because obviously they raised her. And from what I understand, they were very much about education. They, were very encouraging of her to get as educated as she could. She was the oldest of 8 children, which a lot of people who are the oldest of their siblings, take on a lot of responsibility for the younger siblings. And then, like I mentioned, she grew up with her father, who was very politically active and engaged in the community. He was considered a leader. Her mother, this is gender roles that, at this point, her mother wasn't able to be as involved in that, but she had 8 children. And so she also took advantage of the opportunity to become educated herself, and she went to school with Ida. In multiple ways, her parents were, I get the impression that they really enthusiastically embraced and took advantage of all of the newly found rights that were available to free enslaved people. And and then just the environment that Ida was growing up in. She grew up in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is it's a town. It's not a farming situation. It was more of an urban situation. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of ideas that were being exchanged in this environment. So she grew up not around only her parents, but around in a whole community of people who were, engaged. And Russ College, it's called Russ College now, with Shaw University at the time, is in Holly Springs, Mississippi. So you have this environment where there's an educational institution right there in that space. It's an urban area. It's not that far from Memphis. She ultimately did move to Memphis, and she was part of a small but significant educated middle class of people in Memphis who socialized together. She was part of lyceums that were sort of literary clubs where they would read together and do plays and skits and poetry, and I'm sure exchanging ideas, having conversations, and so she was part of a community. She didn't live by herself, and so I think all of this had to shape her. In addition to, she did lose her parents when she was 16 years old. She decided to take care of her younger 5 remaining siblings, which is a huge responsibility at a very young age. But she also still had a community. Her grandmother was there to help. Her parents had friends who, offered to pitch in and help. And so I'm sure all of it, influenced her. And then obviously there's just, personal sort of temperament that, one can argue people might be born with. You see little children at age 2 have very strong personalities. So that could have just been her makeup, as far as being very stubborn, and, opinionated and just willing to fight. So I'm sure it's all a combination of all of it.
I'm sure it is, and you've named a number of factors that no doubt did contribute to it. But the determination, strikes me as her superpower. As I've learned about her, she was just unstoppable. And whether that is, kind of a soul essence that entered the world with her, or I guess it's nature or nurture, or the combination of the two. But it certainly was an extraordinary life. And the courage that she had, the fearlessness, is what stands out to me. Because she didn't have to be fearless just once. She had to be fearless over and over and over again in her life, because there is, sadly, I guess, that much injustice, things that need to be fixed in order for people to be free and to be able to exert their rights. So I was also hoping, Michelle, that you could tell us about a memorial that I think a lot of people still don't know about, but the National Memorial for Peace and Justice opened in 2018 in Montgomery, Alabama. And in addition to honoring and identifying victims of lynching, it also honors Ida B. Wells. There's a reflection space there for Ida B. Wells. And I was hoping that you could tell us about this memorial, its purpose, and its impact, and how it honors your great-grandmother.
Well, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, is a institution that was created by the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, and they have done work for decades, to free. Well, they started off, to work for people on death row, to represent people on death row in Alabama, and as time has gone on, they've expanded out to just kind of a lot of other injustice that is in our country, and also where the mass incarceration has come from. And there is a direct tie between lynching and mass incarceration. A lot of people have seen the tie between these two aspects of our country's history. And so the point of the memorial is to honor and recognize the victims of lynching, which is very important because a lot of times the people who were lynched, there's, how can you say, in this country, there's been a lot of erasure and a lot of sort of minimizing the effect of this terrorism that is actual truth in our country's history. And so this space has over 800 steel columns, metal columns. I'm not sure what metal they're made out of, but they're metal columns, one for each county in this country where lynchings took place. And on the columns, it has the names and the dates of the people who were lynched in each county. So there are over 800 of these columns and representing over 4,000 victims. And those are the ones that they were able to identify before 2018. I understand that they've uncovered over 2,500 more since then. And so when you're walking through the space, the floor has a gradual descent. And so the columns go from being sort of eye level to being way above your head, which kind of represents lynching. And then when you walk around outside of the space, then you eventually get to what's called Ida B. Wells Grove, which has some columns that I guess you can kind of sit on and reflect. And so she's recognized in that memorial as somebody who fought, to expose the realities of lynching, but she's also represented in the museum. There's a legacy museum from mass incarceration, from slavery to mass incarceration. And so she's represented in that museum as well.
Yeah, and it's so fitting because as we were talking about before, she told the story, she made the history, she made the case for lynching. And so it seems appropriate that there be a reflection space that honors and acknowledges the work that she did. Have you been there, Michelle, to the National Memorial?
Yes, I've been there twice so far.
What is the impact? What impact did it have on you to be there?
I think it's very moving because it puts names and dates of the people who were lynched in perspective. It's not some intangible, concept. They're actual people who were lynched. And so like the three friends of my great-grandmother who were lynched, I saw the column where their names are and I stood next to it. And so it just makes it tangible and real and humanizes the people. And it's something that I think is very important for our country to confront this actual reality and to see the numbers. And then there's also panels along one of the walls that has a listing of different reasons or excuses that were used to lynch people. And it's just ridiculous when you read this, of somebody who, they stole a piece of bread, or they, just the it's literally either very petty crimes or accusations that weren't, and this is extrajudicial killing. So there were no trials involved. And so it really, people need to see this because it is a part of our history and it lasted for over 80 years. So it was not something that just, was like a one-off kind of thing. This was integral into our society.
Yeah, and it's not the remote past either. It sadly wasn't that long ago. I would love to go there and hope to do one of the, now that travel seems more doable. So anyway, thank you for that description, Michelle. Michelle, as we close the interview, I was hoping that you might be willing to share a favorite story of your own or a quotation from your great-grandmother. So she's family, and so you know her, and you have access to more personal or intimate stories about her. Maybe a story or an inspiration that you personally find particularly inspiring as a descendant of hers.
Well, I have to mention that I never met my great-grandmother. She died 32 years before I was born. And my father even never met her because he was born 1 year after she died. So what I know about her are family stories and what I've read through my research. But when I was researching for Ida B. the Queen, one of the things that she mentioned that really resonated with me was how she stood up for herself when a minister, when she heard that a minister was sort of spreading rumors that would reflect badly on her. And so she decided to literally go to his house and confront him, to let him know that she didn't appreciate what he was saying and to demand an apology. And not only did she demand an apology, but she also brought several friends with her, male friends with her, to kind of, have her back. And she wrote out the apology for the minister. So she didn't even leave it to him to think of his own apology. She's like, this is what you're going to say. And she demanded that he say it in public. And he was a minister, so she wanted him to say it in front of his congregation, and she wrote down what she wanted him to say. And so that story, I mean, it's a very small part of her autobiography, but it really had a lot of meaning to me because it showed how she was willing to confront people who, were disparaging her, and how much she believed in herself, and how much love she had to demand respect.
Yes.
Even from somebody who could be considered in a leadership position. She was like, I'm not going to let you get away with this. And I'm going to confront you face to face.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you what to say.
Well, she is an inspiring woman. And she belongs in that Inspiring Women series. And that's a wonderful story, Michelle. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to visit the morning show today and to teach us about Ida B. Wells. I continue to just be awestruck by her courage and also her determination, and just what you were just describing. A certain, no, that's not going to stand. I'm going to take care of it. And this is what you should say. I love it. Michelle, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk with you today and to learn more about the amazing Ida B. Wells. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
It's totally been my privilege. You take care now, and please let me know when you're forthcoming with another book, and perhaps we can have you back to talk about other inspiring women. Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.
And now we can welcome my next guest is here. Suzanne DeBoos is here. She's the executive director of the Jean Geiger Crisis Center, which since 1982 has been helping individuals and families impacted by domestic violence. Their mission is to engage individuals and communities to end domestic violence. She's here today to talk about the center's 10th annual White Ribbon event, part of a worldwide movement for human rights that engages men and boys to help end gender-based violence, which is due to launch this event on March 28th. So Suzanne, it's wonderful to see you again.
It's good to see you, Mary. Thank you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. You're up to 10 years now with the White Ribbon event. So tell us about, first of all, just a reminder of the overarching mission of the White Ribbon event, and then we'll talk about what year number 10 is bringing.
Oh, wonderful. So the White Ribbon event truly is our effort to continue to raise funds for our prevention efforts in the schools, which I consider to be a really important foundational piece to our work. My sense and the sense of the folks at the organization is we are only fulfilling part of our mission if we are excluding prevention. And so we joined the White Ribbon campaign 10 years ago. And this is really a way to engage boys and men in the fight against violence against women and girls. When I first started at the center, I think we still were kind of feeling like this is women are going to be the people that figure out how this is going to stop. And the truth is, most boys and men really want to do right, and they want to confront the kind of sexism and oppression. And so if we don't engage with them, we're really missing a big part of the solution. Yeah. And so this is kind of our 10th year of marking the importance of boys and men and inviting more boys and men to participate.
Well, wonderful. And such a critical adjustment to make in thinking about prevention means reaching out to boys and men so that they can alter in fact, I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit before we talk about the video series about the approach that you take in trying to adjust the definition of masculinity. I think one of your speakers will be, I may not pronounce his name, Josue Argüelles,
Yes.
of A Call to Men.
Yes.
And I know in the promotional material, they emphasize trying to promote healthy masculinity. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what is healthy masculinity? What are the adjustments that need to be made so that boys and men's definition of what it means to be a man, manly or masculine, is healthy, promotes well-being for them first and foremost, but then by extension for the world?
So, when I first started, first of all, I love this question and I love talking about this. When we first started the prevention program that we have right now, we started with Girls Inc. And I remember being so excited about having this formal way that we were going to be doing this work with girls. And the minute that I announced it publicly, someone's hand went up in the back of the room and said, well, what about boys? And I remember at the time thinking, hey, let us perfect what we need to do to help girls avoid abusive and bullying relationships, and then we're going to get back to you. And one reason for that delay was also not being quite sure, because there was no formal boys program that was formed at that point. I wasn't quite sure what this meant. And as we began to do the work with the girls, it became crystal clear to me what was missing for boys. And for boys wrestle with the same kinds of things that girls do. A lack of confidence. They have unrealistic images of, what a man's body is supposed to look like, the way men are supposed to behave, that they're protectors, that they shouldn't be feeling things. Their job is to be tough and be out in the world. And that just strips away the soul of boys and men. And, in the same way that media and it's not just media, it's, people talk about racism as this is the water that we swim in. Sexism is the same thing. It is the way that we were raised. So when we begin to have conversations with boys in schools, it is about, what kind of man do you want to be? And part of what we educate them on is the man box. And so there's a very rigid box that you're expected to fit into. And if you don't fit into that, then there's a whole bunch of words, negative words that you will be called. And so it takes a tremendous amount of courage to step out of that man box. Our job is to not only help individual boys think about this, but it's also to change the culture in a community, whether it's a classroom, a school, or the community at large, so that these are welcome, that we're embracing these conversations with young people rather than having all this thought going on at school and then they go home and they're criticized for it.
Yeah, that image of the man box is very compelling because it illustrates the constriction. You can't be free when you live in a box.
Right.
And you can't live your own life. You can't find out who you are.
That's right.
And there are so many ways that life requires us to be strong. And if we're not fluid and flexible and able to develop some of those other variants of strength, we're limited to something that is only, it's a faux strength. It's not really strength at all. In fact, it makes people fragile in a certain way because they can be broken easily. Negative emotions will flow from that. They'll seep out the cracks. It
is the separation of yourself from your soul. And so it is, you are going to feel things about that.
That's right. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Suzanne. Would you tell us now then about plans for the 10th year?
Yeah, so, again, I hate to say it, but this is our 3rd year in a row where this is a virtual event. And what we're celebrating is our 10th year anniversary of participating in this global campaign. And that over that 10-year period, we provided education and prevention services to 10,000 young people. So it's, 10,000 for 10. And It's a tremendous achievement. You know, one of the things that that we wrestle with as an organization is this is not a program that's funded by any state or federal contract, that this is something that we have committed to do because it is an essential part of our mission. And we have to raise money throughout the year in order to provide the services, which we have always embraced. Like, we do it, we're in.
Yeah.
And so part of the reason for the White Ribbon Breakfast that we normally have is to raise money for these programs. So this year, you know, we're continuing to raise money. We've been raising money for this for a while, but it's going to start on March, I was about to say May, no, March 28th. And we
wish.
Yeah, not yet. It'll be a little warmer. And it's going to be a series of videos that drop. And so you have already mentioned Jose Arguelles. So he is the director of youth engagement at an organization who is a close collaborator of ours called A Call to Men. And so he will be talking about the importance of this work with young boys and men. You will hear from different staff people who are working with young people, either in our trauma intervention program or in the prevention programs in the schools. You'll hear about like what's happening, and then how has COVID exacerbated this and made kids feel even more isolated, more fragile, and kind of what we're doing to try to help with that. And it's really exciting. I have to say, I love the video folks that we work with. The videos look and sound really fantastic, but it's a great way for people, if you're not familiar, like if you think you know who the Crisis Center is and what we do, but you haven't been able to hear much about our prevention programs, it's a really wonderful way to tune in and watch a short video and just get a better sense about what we do and what we're seeing in the communities.
Yeah. Wonderful, Suzanne. And I believe that people can sign up to receive the videos automatically every day over the course of the week from Monday to Friday.
Yes, you can. And I'm sure I have instructions here somewhere. But I'm sure if you go to our website, which is jeanniegeiger.org, there is a link and you can put in your email and you will get that. We will also be sending out, if you receive our electronic newsletters, you will also be receiving that newsletter that will explain to you how to do that.
So it's easy to get access to the daily emails and have them
It's
sent
very
to you.
easy. Yes.
And I think I read in the promotional materials something about social media contests.
Yeah, so we're giving away a number of exciting prizes to people who participate in the campaign and watch the videos. So all the details will be on our social media. So it's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and they'll also be sent out in our emails. And so the prizes are pretty cool. 2 Patriots tickets with sideline passes, which I have talked to people who win that, and they're just out of their minds with excitement.
Over the moon, I bet.
They're that close, right? And another prize is a one-night stay at the Elliott Hotel and a $300 gift card to the Uni restaurant. And then we also have gift certificates to local restaurants of the winner's choice. And so one of the reasons we do that is we know the restaurant industry is hurting and we want to support our local folks.
It's a win-win.
Yes, it's a win-win-win. You get to eat fantastic food. We support the restaurants and you've supported White Ribbon.
Wonderful. It sounds fantastic. And, you know, just to repeat, this is a fundraiser for your youth empowerment services known as YES.
Yes.
And is there anything more you'd like to say, Suzanne, about, you mentioned Girls Inc., which is one of those programs. I know that their programs are all evidence-based and nationally recognized approaches to educating youth. Would you like to say anything else about some of the programs, perhaps some of the specific ones that people will be supporting by supporting the White Ribbon event?
Thank you. So Girls Inc. is a big piece. And so Girls Inc., girls are also part of the solution to growing healthy boys and men, because we want girls to understand that boys go through similar kinds of things that they do. And so to greet their own work with compassion. But the mission of Girls Inc. is to inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And so we do a wonderful work there. But since this is mostly focused on boys and girls, boys and men, I'll talk about what we're doing. So we have the bystander education program, which is really, we partnered with the Northeastern Mentors on Violence, MVP, Mentors on Violence Prevention. That's what it is.
There you go.
And it's a wonderful program where young people are taught not only how to recognize abuse and bullying, but how to go from being a bystander to being an upstander, and to give them tools to do that safely. And lots of times it's not going to entail confronting another student, but engaging with the right adult in the school. So that's a big program. We just did training in the Amesbury High School to, I think, almost 100 staff and faculty on the program. And we have been doing this work for nearly 10 years, I think about 9 years now.
Wow.
So that's one of the programs that is being supported. The other program is Healthy Masculinity. So that's, again, mostly a boys only audience, where they are really encouraged to do this deeper work. We use a documentary called The Mask You Live In to help talk about and introduce the man box. And then we also do healthy relationships work with, this idea that sometimes young people find themselves in abusive relationships, and it doesn't look different to them than what they're seeing on social media or on TV or listening to in music. And so one of the things we thought about is, wouldn't it be wonderful to kind of demonstrate, here's what a healthy relationship looks like, here's what it feels like, that it should be joyful, happy, that it shouldn't necessarily be full of drama. And so that's just a glimpse at some of the work that we are currently doing in the schools.
Well, thank you for that. It's such important work, and I'm really just thrilled that you're doing it because it's badly needed.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that's wonderful, Suzanne. Thank you so much for describing those programs and for participating in the White Ribbon event. And thanks for coming on the morning show to talk to us about it. I really appreciate it. And once again, if people would like more information, you can go to www.jeangeiger.org/events, and you'll find all the information you need about the White Ribbon event, and you can sign up to get those videos. Suzanne, thank you so much, not just for visiting the show, but thank you for all the work that you do, and all the people that you help, and for helping to create a world in which there's just more well-being for everybody. Thank you
so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at ncmhub.org. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org, click on the cloud, and scroll down. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you. Take good care.